Pass the ball back out. Now the shot goes up by Simpson. Now watch David Thompson coming through the lane area. Look how high he is.
When athletes become legends, they stretch the boundaries of what was thought to be possible. This is a story about basketball's first high flyer.
David Thompson was a flawless basketball player. What was truly unique was that you had a guy who could fly, who could soar, who could do everything physically, and then really had a game as well.
He's my inspiration. I think, as I was growing up. I grew up watching NC State. I was a David Thompson fan. I enjoyed the way he played, his aggressiveness, his scoring capabilities. And at 6'4", being able to play his game above the rim was truly amazing for any kid to watch.
Thompson's style would have a huge impact on college basketball. His accomplishments would rank him as one of the top players in the history of the game. After turning pro, Thompson would meet Dr. J in the first ever slam dunk contest and would amaze the basketball world with an array of spinning and twisting dunks.
If David Thompson played in today's game, he'd be an all-star, he'd be all-NBA, he'd be on the USA national team, he would be an MVP candidate.
David was like Joe Montana, Tiger Woods, or Michael Jordan. They're always going to have the perfect endings.
A rush to fame and fortune put the spotlight directly on David.
Here's this guy who probably only got a checking account a few years previous. And now he's as rich as some of the richest people in society. It's almost a situation that, makes a guy like that hurt himself.
In the 1960s, America was a country deeply divided and segregated by race. Civil rights leaders such as Martin Luther King Jr. would demand equal rights for all Americans, for housing, in the workplace, and in public schools.
In 1967-68, Crest High School was opened as a totally integrated, totally consolidated school for southwestern Cleveland County.
David Thompson, probably as much as anyone, gets a lot of credit for making that transition very smooth in an area of the South that perhaps things couldn't have gone smoothly.
David would become the star of the newly integrated team. He could handle the basketball and lead the break, had a silky smooth jumper. But his passion was taking the ball to the hoop.
Oh, the best skill he had was jumping. He could jump plumb out of the gym. I never saw him touch the top of the board or take a dime or a quarter off the top of the board, but he could get up there that high. He could touch his elbow on the rim.
David showed signs of greatness and amazing athletic ability, the roots of which came from hard work.
He worked out like a football player or either a track guy. He ran extra 3 miles every day, and he did extra squats. He could lift 125 pounds per leg. He could do it 25 times straight.
Unlike the inner city neighborhoods that were the origin for many black athletes, David grew up in the rural countryside of Boiling Springs, North Carolina, to a family rich with religious conviction.
We grew up in two very Christian homes. Our parents were extremely close. We were very spiritual. Our church was a really close-knit church, and his father and my father was deacons in our church.
Outside the home, David would find another calling.
I started playing basketball when I was about 5 years old. My older brother, Thompson Jr., taught me how to play.
We built our own basketball arena. He and I and his older brother, we dug it out from dirt. We packed it down. We put a basket up.
It was really hard to jump off of, but playing on it all the time, getting used to jumping and dunking on it. Once I got to the gym, it was, hey, I was jumping a foot higher, it seemed.
At 13, David would start to compete at the local college.
Gardner-Webb College in my hometown of Shelby probably had as good a basketball camps as I've ever been around.
And the highlight for the kids would be at night, after we were finished with all of our stuff, the counselors would play a game. And I vividly remember games when David would clash with the John Drews and the George Adamses and the Artis Gilmores of the world. Artis Gilmore had this big left-handed tomahawk slam. It would be interesting to watch to see if David could quickly get a dunk off before Gilmore would get his left hand to swipe it.
As David's high school career came to a close, the young basketball prodigy would become the subject of a recruiting scandal that would leave his college of choice on probation for a year.
David Thompson was by far the greatest college basketball player I ever played against.
Before him, for me, I never saw a 6'4" guy that could jump and be as active and creative as he was, and such a potent offensive weapon.
Got some fine shooters out there. That's David Thompson.
David Thompson, for that time, with his explosive power, with his leaping ability, he was extremely skilled as a basketball player. He could shoot it, he could take it to the basket, he could defend, he had long arms.
You couldn't be a sports fan in North Carolina without knowing David Thomson. There was a certain buzz in the sports scene about this young man who was playing above the rim.
David Thomson came on the scene right when college basketball was starting to take over television. Remember, there was no cable television in those days. There was no ESPN. If David Thomson came along today, he would revolutionize basketball. He did it in his own way.
Thompson would usher in a new style of game, one played above the rim. As the 1970s began, America was in outer space, landing a man on the moon. Back on Earth, the Vietnam War raged out of control, and the nation's youth began to protest. In Raleigh, North Carolina, the big news was the signing of a high school basketball phenomenon.
I think the way we were able to get David Thomson at North Carolina State, number one, we had Tommy. He knew he was going to be playing with the big man.
Sloan would use a cunning strategy to land his prize recruit.
You come here to NC State and you will be the guy that everybody compares future players to. You go to Carolina, they're going to be comparing you to Charlie Scotts and people like that.
One of the guys I idolized back during that time was a guy by the name of Charlie Scott. He was pretty much one of the pioneers of the game, and I looked up to him.
Charlie Scott was the first African-American to play at a predominantly white school below the Mason-Dixon line.
Thompson would also overcome barriers when he burst on the scene as a freshman at NC State.
He was the #1 player in the country as a freshman. At that time, though, freshmen could not play on the varsity team. I just remember watching him play the Carolina freshman. I saw him get 38 against those guys without really breaking a sweat.
One of the keys to Thompson's success was the playmaking of 5'7" point guard MoeDee Tao.
He impressed me right from the first day. He was a winner, could shoot the basketball, get the basketball to the players at the right time, and really, to be honest with you, he's probably the best point guard I ever played with. They used to call us the circus team. We had the giant, the midget, and the man on the high wire act.
On this unique squad, 6'4" David could jump center, and 7'4" Burleson could lead the break. Everything was as smooth as a Thompson jump shot until the NCAA lowered the boom.
We were put on probation for 1 year for really nothing, just really nothing. What happened, we signed David Thomson. David came up to visit. I knew he was here. I didn't know where he was staying. I didn't worry about it. But while he was here, he got involved in a pickup game, and one of the guys playing in the game was captain of Carolina's football team. If that situation occurred today, it wouldn't even be a slap on the wrist.
Although the team was on probation, the fans were excited, and everyone in the area was taking notice of a very special player.
One of my first experiences with David was we would play head-to-head sort of on both ends of the court, and I just remember how unusual it was to see a guy who could elevate at 6'4" the way he did. By that time, I was 6'9", and I could block shots and I could bother shots, and again, I would get on David and feel like I'm going to either block it or get a piece of it, deflect it, something, and the shot would go in.
Thompson was more than talented. He was a hard worker.
David was a player that worked at his game, and he had just great touch.
The team had an undefeated season, and DT was named ACC Player of the Year.
By his sophomore year, obviously he was All-American. He was the consensus Player of the Year.
Because dunking was outlawed in college basketball, a new style of play emerged, utilizing Thompson's amazing leaping ability.
You couldn't dunk in those days. Everybody thinks about David as this high wire act. He couldn't dunk the basketball.
The whole alley-oop term he created, he innovated the game in terms of playing above the rim.
He had perfected the alley-oop play. The way that he did it became a way that players who were older and more experienced began to do it.
It happened kind of by accident one day in practice. Everybody back in the day used to overplay, and I was going back door, and Monty threw a pretty high pass and looked like it was going out of the gym, and I reached up and grabbed the ball and laid it into the basket. And Coach Sloan said, I think I like that.
Coach Sloan was going to have a lot to cheer about in the upcoming year. David had caught the eye of the national media, but Thompson and the Wolfpack would have to conquer UCLA before they could claim greatness.
That team was unique because it had all of the ingredients, and it blended perfectly. When you put together a Monty Tao with a Mo Rivers, and put together with a Tommy Burleson, and obviously with David, who could have played on any national or world championship team.
Strongman Tim Stoddard and power forward Phil Spence rounded out a diverse group that was a true blending of American culture.
Since I was from a rural area, they'd say I was from D.C., the country.
Bill Spence was a Black Panther type. I was the more white redneck type.
Tommy was a redneck, and I guess I was the Black Panther. I guess that's the way it was.
Back it goes to Burleson. Burleson moving on one, and underneath.
NC State would get a chance to prove themselves against powerhouse UCLA.
UCLA had won 7 straight national championships with John Wooden, and we'd gone undefeated. Both of us were undefeated in the 72-73 season. Our athletic director, Willis Casey, got a hold of J.D. Morgan out at UCLA to arrange a special game in December.
Going out there and seeing these guys, they're on TV all the time. You know their team. You knew all the players. Just to go out there and see them in person, I think that all hit us a little bit the first time we played them.
It was a pretty rough game. We were actually ahead at halftime. And we came back in the second half, and Keith Wilkes and David Myers and Bill Walton and the team of UCLA put us away.
The Wolfpack would have to win the ACC tournament to get another crack at UCLA.
At that time, though, it was really difficult because if you didn't win the ACC tournament, you didn't go to the NC2A tournament. And at that time, they were only taking 24 teams.
They would get their chance against rival Maryland.
Maryland, of course, they were up there ranked 2, 3 at certain times with Elmore, McMillan, John Lucas.
Maryland at the time, they were the UCLA of the East, so to speak.
One of the most historically significant games was obviously the Maryland-NC State game. What people knew then and now fail to realize the significance is that one of them knew that after that night, they were going nowhere.
David would have a great game, but teammate Burleson, incensed that Maryland center Elmore was named first-team All-ACC, played with a vengeance.
Elmore, Burleson, 30 points for Tommy Burleson.
The team would celebrate an ACC championship. But in a first-round NCAA game, Thompson would take a risk that would nearly end more than a title run.
Lost my cool now. Decided to go down the end of the court and do something spectacular. And the same guy that hit my elbow was taking a jump shot from the corner. And I took off running and jumped up in the air and tipped the shot. But while I was in the air, Phil Spence was moving in for rebounding position. And I tripped over his shoulder and hit my head on the floor and was knocked unconscious.
I thought for a while there when he was laying on the floor, we may not see David Thomspon again. It was that horrific a fall.
And I went to the hospital. They sewed me up with 15 stitches in the back of my head.
When he walked back into that gym and we could see he was all right, he lifted the spirits of our team. He lifted the spirits of everyone in that Coliseum.
NC State would defeat Pitt to reach a showdown with the mighty Bruins.
You know, at the time, UCLA was everything. In 1974, it was a young guy, 6'4" and under, against UCLA, and just showed that David and Goliath type of mentality.
6'11" All-American Bill Walton would lead the Bruins into Greensboro.
We showed up in our sandals and our bathing suits. We were ready to play some ball. It was snow on the ground, and we couldn't believe.
Walton did come into the locker room, came in, and, you know, he's his typical self. He came in and wished us luck.
Thompson and Walton would fight an epic battle.
Walton had that quick turnaround jump shot, and he came down the first time he tried to do it. He went up to shoot it. David blocked it.
Lee driving, passing to Walton. Blocked by David Thompson.
The game would go into 2 overtimes, where State would prevail.
They had a 7-point lead with 2.5 minutes left, and I think they started celebrating a little bit too quickly.
His ability to bring that team together, North Carolina State, and end UCLA's run, this was truly one of the great accomplishments in the history of college basketball.
I think the whole United States, and especially the South and ACC, David Thompson embodied the whole aspect of how this young guy going against that big elite school of UCLA overcame the odds and won NCAA. I think that helped the evolution of college basketball. And I think it started, I wouldn't say the downfall of it, I think it released some of the dominance of UCLA.
In all the years that I played for John Wooden, he only mentioned one player from the other team by name, and that was David Thompson. And that was the time that we lost.
Thompson and the Pack would prevail over Marquette and win their first NCAA title.
The Pack is back. A standing ovation. It's a momentous occasion.
I would just like to say that I love you people, and thanks a lot for help making us #1. All right.
Thompson's picture-perfect game and style had helped NC State win a college championship. He was now a star in North Carolina.
Wherever he went, he was recognized. Wherever we go, people wanted a piece of him, and they wanted a part of him, and they wanted to talk to him.
He acted the opposite you thought that a superstar would act. He'd sign an autograph for anyone at any time. You know, he'd pick up a child for a picture.
I would treat people the way I would like them to treat me. You know, my father taught me that at a young age, you know, just to treat people the way you'd like them to treat you, and then, you know, they'll reciprocate.
As great as a basketball player as he ever was, he was a much better human being.
He had such a great sense of humility. He was a person who had graceful greatness.
I've had other athletes, and I won't name them, that were great players and played in professional basketball. They always felt like they were better than they really were. David never really appreciated how good he was. He always felt he had to work on things to get better.
After the championship, Thompson would take his high-wire act abroad, where he would amaze opponents. Thompson would lead a team of young Americans in the World University Games. The games would be played in the Soviet Union, where the U.S. team would attempt to avenge the 1972 Olympic loss.
And we went up over there and played basically the same Russian team that had beat the Olympic team the year before, played them at the University of Moscow and beat them by about 20 points.
Back in the States, David would prepare for a senior season without the graduated Tommy Burleson.
We had faith in David, and David gave us courage. When we did wind sprints, David was first. By David being first, it made us try to become first.
Well, my senior year, I thought we were going to repeat again. You know, we had the nucleus of the team. We thought with the guys we had coming back, we had a good chance to win again.
Thompson would lead State through another successful season. But a rematch with arch-rival Maryland was looming in the ACC tournament. Maryland and NCSU would square off once more, and although the players would go to battle, 2 colorful coaches would take center stage.
The thing that speaks to how colorful they were is very few people now will talk about Norm Sloan without talking about his suits. Very few people talk about Lefty Driesell without talking about the bald head and how it would get hot and red and how furious he'd get in his stomp.
Thompson would lead State into the final, where they would face legendary coach Dean Smith and his North Carolina team led by Phil Ford.
Carolina was a little different. They, back then, if they got a lead on you, they'd go into the four corners, and that's something you didn't want, especially once they got Phil Ford.
By the end of mid-March, Coach Smith had really worked with us and put us together to become a very good basketball team, and we played four corners and beat State.
NC State would lose to Carolina, Thompson would get hurt, and the team would not receive an NCAA bid. David would finish his college career as the Eastman Kodak Player of the Year. In the mid-70s, Americans would wave goodbye to a president who would leave office in disgrace. The country would also celebrate its bicentennial at a time when ideas on popular culture would begin to change.
The 70s is a moment when black culture as a whole is starting to reach mainstream America.
One way was through basketball and a league called the ABA, the star of which was Dr. J. Julius Erving.
For a lot of African-American basketball players, the ABA offered an opportunity for them to play a game very much akin to the game being played in schoolyards or playgrounds or what have you. This sort of fast-paced emphasis on athletics, jumping ability, quickness, and also, you know, just flair and style.
Thompson would be the #1 pick in both the ABA and NBA drafts, but would choose the upstart league.
It was a tough choice. Do you want to go to the NBA and be on national TV immediately, or go to an ABA in a league which I knew had the best young talent? George Gervin, Dr. J, Artis Gilmore.
Other colorful stars included high schooler Moses Malone, Dan Issel, Marvin Bad News Barnes, George McGinnis, and Bobby Jones. NBA stars like Billy Cunningham and Rick Barry would leave the NBA for greener pastures and a fast-paced, aggressive game.
The players in the ABA have more of a swagger. And it's not even an exaggeration. There'd probably be a fight every other game. It was so competitive.
The ABA encouraged that. They really didn't mind a good fight right in the middle of the game.
The NBA was the the suit league, if you want to say, run by the suits, and they had to do this, they had to do that.
The ABA was wide open, played with a red, white, and blue ball, had a three-point goal, had guys that would sky over the basket, was really ahead of its time.
Thompson would be the ultimate leaper in this league of high flyers.
When David Thompson stepped on the floor, you knew you were looking at David Thompson. You were not confusing him with anybody else.
Thompson's legend would grow, but a defining moment for all of basketball would take place at halftime of the ABA All-Star Game. David and Dr. J would meet in the first ever slam dunk contest.
It got down to the final two guys, and it was David and myself. David came out of the left corner, and he did a pirouette. He just looked like a missile going up into the air, and he nailed a dunk.
Twist around, slam dunk.
And I knew that after that, I was going to have to come up with something. I was not going to just be able to, jump from the 12-foot line. I have to try to foul line dunk.
But I thought I still had a good chance to win because of the crowd response, and until Dr. J marked off his steps, took off from past half court, started running, afro blowing in the wind, and he took off from the free throw line, just soared to the basket, and of course I came in second.
Thompson and the Nuggets would meet the New York Nets in the 1976 ABA Finals, which would feature another matchup with Dr. J. The series would start with Thompson and college buddy Monty Tao showing off the pro version of the alley-oop.
Monty knew exactly when to feed David and would hit him in stride coming in transition. And this guy would just explode. I mean, he tried to take the ball to the hole and dunk it all the time.
Dr. J and the Nets would take game one.
But we came back and won the second game and still had the series in pretty good shape. We had a huge lead in game 6 back in New York, looking to bring it back to Denver for a game 7.
Game 7 was not to be, as Dr. J slammed home a championship for New York in what would be the last ABA game ever played. Thompson and the Denver franchise would face a bold new challenge in the following season. Thompson's Nuggets, San Antonio, Indiana, and Dr. J's Nets were absorbed into the NBA in what was called a merger.
Probably a poor choice of words. We went on a suicide mission to the NBA and listened to them tell us what the rules were.
The NBA was happy to have a team in Denver, kind of halfway between Chicago and the West Coast. And the fact that we had David on that team certainly helped promote the Nuggets being one of the teams that went into the NBA.
When the ABA had the merger with the NBA in '76, they always gave you a few guys you look out for. David was on that list, Julius was on that list, Artis Gilmore was on that list, George Gervin was on that list, and David Thompson was on that list.
DT was happy in the NBA and was averaging 26 points per game.
We had great fan support. As a matter of fact, we led all of pro basketball in attendance.
The people really came out to watch us play. And they came out for two reasons. Number one, we still had a little bit of that ABA in us, where we got up and down the court and scored an awful lot of points. But they came to see David, too, because he could do things that a lot of people in the NBA had never seen.
Best basketball of the day and probably the road. Oh, bring it down. Oh, did you see?
Thompson's aerial attack made him a celebrity in the Mile High City.
Thompson was a star in a small market city, and the city gravitated to him, and his image had something to do with it, sure, because it was hard for a rebellious black figure to exist. Even though Ali existed, there was a lot of detractors.
David was an extremely popular guy. I mean, he looked good. He was friendly. You could take him to a school, and he was good with kids. He's the kind of guy that the kids seemed to identify with.
David would put on clinics for children who would delight in watching his amazing dunks. He was developing a reputation with opponents as well.
If you put a big guy on him, he takes you outside and shoots over you. If you put a little guy on him, he just takes you inside and jumps over you. He's virtually unguardable.
Dennis Johnson was one of the best defenders in the NBA.
But he's one of them guys who can go real fast and stop on the dime and just pull up. I mean, he was a tough handle.
When I would go into the games against David, I knew I had to be at the top of my game because he was coming at you.
Thompson would meet rival Walton in the 1977 NBA playoffs. But Portland would ultimately prevail. Thompson would be named All-NBA and had garnered the reputation as the league's highest jumper and one of its greatest dunkers.
Thompson, clearly, when you look back, is the guy who made the vertical leap, something that everybody in basketball began talking about.
The whole term and the whole measuring of vertical leap began, I think, with David Thompson. He vaulted off the ground, exploded off the ground. 44 inches was a lot. It still is a lot. You can tell when he was there above you, he surprised you.
David's jumping would always be compared with Dr. J's.
David could jump higher than Julius, but David had smaller hands. Julius was the glider. David was the leaper.
The legend was I could take a quarter off and leave 2 dimes and a nickel. I didn't quite have that much hang time, but I could get the top of the backboards.
But what allowed him to take off like a rocket?
He's able to immediately start going up. He can make big muscle forces. He can do it very fast. He's been blessed genetically to do that, probably by muscle type. He's also got a great body type for a jumper. A lot of strength in his legs, but not a lot of extra mass that he has to carry around. All of those things work together to facilitate his ability to jump high and to jump fast. If this clay surface that he grew up on and learned to jump on also was softer, which it's going to be than a hard floor, a hard basketball floor, that may have contributed for him to learn how to jump in such a way to make big forces and to make them in a short period of time, and that would fit with him being a fast jumper, someone who could explode off the floor very quickly.
Most of the guys that played on dirt courts out here were pretty good jumpers. I heard Michael Jordan and Larry Jordan, he told me one time that they played on dirt courts too, so there must be some truth to it.
There's always been people that can jump. What was truly unique about David Thompson was that you had a guy who could fly, who could soar, who could do everything physically, and then really had a game as well.
The guy had one of the fastest first steps in the league. And see, he was not big. David, I know he probably wanted to call himself 6'3½", but he was probably more like 6'2", but he jumped like he was 6'9½".
He had a quick first step, but to me, David's slam dunks were just unbelievable. There was nobody that could dunk like David.
His quickness had some peculiar origins.
A shortcut home was going through the cemetery. I'd run through there, and, you know, most of the nights it was dark, so I was flying through there, dodging headstones and jumping over some. Some people credit my quickness and my quick first step for running around those tombstones.
He was the complete package from the first day he came to professional basketball. David was an outstanding shooter. Julius Erving and Michael, the people that we compare great players to, they developed that jump shot as their careers developed. David had that from the very beginning.
Until Michael Jordan came along, I would say he was the best one-on-one player I had seen. I know it's a big statement to make, but he just was, in my view, totally unstoppable. When he got it rolling, there was just absolutely nothing you could do.
David could get on fire from 18 to 25 feet. He had unbelievable moves. He had a quick step. But his leaping ability is what would take you out of your chair.
The Nuggets were having another great season and were a cohesive unit.
All of his teammates loved him because he helped you win games, and he was the type of player that made everybody on the court better, not a player who subtracted from the rest of the team to get his stats.
Against Detroit in the final game of the season, DT would play for a scoring title.
The first half was the greatest exhibition I've ever seen. He had 52 points, he was 20 for 23, and he missed his last 2 shots, so you can imagine. And I don't think he forced any shots, and he played within himself, and he wasn't actually going out to win a championship. He was going out to win the, you know, the ball game.
I got pretty hot in the first quarter. The guys would get me the ball in good field position, so I kept shooting it and kept making it.
To score 73 points in a game, you got to be able to dominate that game. You got to be hitting jump shots, you got to be hitting dunks, you got to do all the different defenses, steals, things of that nature. In a 48-minute game, you got to completely dominate.
The game where he scored, I think, 73, he and I combined for 85, I think, that night. But he was, I remember that game, it was, you were aware that he was battling Gervin for the scoring title, but when David came out, he wasn't taking bad shots, but he was just making all the shots.
Thompson would shoot 28 for 38 from the field on his way to 73 points. Denver GM Carl Scheer was quick to sign David, an impending free agent, to a landmark contract.
5-year, $4 million contract, $800,000 a year. And at the time, it was the highest contract in team sports.
Being black in America is always about upward social mobility. How do you go from point A to point B? Well, David Thompson achieved that, and he achieved it at a time when not a whole lot of other African-American athletes had done so. He's used his skills as a basketball player to become a millionaire.
$800,000 doesn't seem like much money today, but you have to remember at that time, the player who was making the most money in professional basketball was Kareem, and he was making $350,000 a year.
David Thompson was living the American dream, but what was around the corner would surprise everyone.
I watched his career with enormous anxieties and sadness as I watched what appeared to be a wonderful young man whose life I thought would be blessed with great successes just deteriorate and go downhill.
Thompson was living the American dream. He signed the largest contract in sports history and was all NBA. Meanwhile, the rest of America was in a recession with runaway inflation. A nuclear power plant at 3 Mile Island would shake the confidence of all Americans. As the Star Wars phenomenon swept across the nation, the name SkyWalker took on a new meaning.
The introduction of the games, they say, SkyWalker, David Thomson, blah, 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 and the crowd would go ballistic. They go bananas. That would fire him up even before the game would start.
When I dunked the basketball, I used to cross my leg in the air, and it looked like I was walking in the air, so that was a natural name for me.
I picture David going right through the middle, driving from the side, going to the middle, rising up above the centers and jamming.
No matter the opposition, he was coming at you. David Thomspon would say, I'm coming to the hoop and I'm going to throw it down in your face, and he succeeded.
David's personal life was taking shape as well. He would marry longtime girlfriend Kathy Barrow. Then SkyWalker would take his act to the 1979 All-Star Game, where his performance would win him the game's MVP. His dazzling dunks would also land him a lucrative shoe contract. But all was not well in the Mile High City. Coach Brown had resigned abruptly, and the team was in disarray. The core team with Issel and Thompson was the same, but Shear had made a move that set the Nuggets back.
One of the trades that I made was the Bobby Jones trade, which was a very, very bad trade and a very bad decision on my part. We traded a great player, a great team player, for a player that just didn't perform in Denver.
That player was George McGinnis.
When George came in, that chemistry that Larry always tries to get with his teams just sort of faded.
David had begun to feel the pressure.
Everything was fine until, I signed a new contract, and we got a lot of top-name ball players on our team. I think seemed to me that that's when it all seemed to turn around.
I think David changed when he got his big contract. We would go into cities, and the media would meet us not at the baggage claim area, not in the terminal. They would be there as we got off the walkway with their cameras and their lights, and they wanted to interview David and talk to him about being the $800,000 man.
I don't know too many people who would be given that opportunity and be able to withstand the pressures that go along with it from your team, from the fans, from your family. I mean, he becomes an income source for more than just himself, more than, just his immediate family. There are people he never heard of, calling him, I need this, I need that. And the minute he stubs his toe, all those people and everybody else, they're pointing fingers.
The Nuggets would make the playoffs where they would meet the Lakers. But the Lakers would overpower the frustrated Nuggets, who would have the earliest playoff exit in their history.
By then, I think everyone, all the fans here, realized that to win an NBA championship, you probably didn't do it with a 6'3" guard.
His game wasn't quite at the level that it was early on. He did experience injuries, and I relate some of those injuries to the game, some of them to not being in as good a shape as he could be.
Thompson was enjoying the nightlife and had fallen prey to temptation.
I frequently went out with him at night. I saw how he got involved in the world of drugs.
People would say, well, you have a player that's doing drugs, or you have a player that's been seen with questionable people, and I didn't want to believe it. And when it got real bad, I'd bring him in, and we'd talk about it, and David was in denial.
When David signed that contract, he had to be one of the richest athletes in the country. That's a lot of money now. Back in the 70s, that was crazy. And, cocaine is all over these elite celebrity circles in basketball and Hollywood, and then a few years later, it's all over society.
A lot of the guys in the league were using at the time just on a social level. And if you know anything about drug and alcohol addiction, you know it's progressive. That's kind of what happened to me. Over the years, it got worse and started causing some problems. Sometimes you think you'd have a handle on it, but then sometimes it would get out of control.
Over the next few years, Thompson's struggles would worsen. The 70s had ended, and the country was becoming less tolerant of drug use. Although he could still fly, the Nuggets were looking to unload their high-priced star.
The Denver Nuggets were financially struggling. They weren't playing well. The gate was down. They had 25 owners who didn't have a lot of money, and they needed to do something.
They traded him for a player that was, very mediocre at best, and Bill Hanslick. There wasn't any comparison with the skill level of the two, so to make that trade, obviously they were trading to get rid of that salary.
After arriving in Seattle, a rejuvenated Thompson would show off his high-wire act to the Sonics. But he was unable to maintain his level of play.
It's very difficult to be up here, come down to here, and here may be still better than average, but it's impossible to get back to this point at that time.
As DT battled injuries, his problem with cocaine would escalate. David would go through a series of public setbacks that would end in a drug rehabilitation center. When he returned to the Sonics, tragedy would strike.
Me and about 5 of my teammates went out to Studio 54 about 3:30 in the morning. I was involved in a confrontation with a guy, and he pushed me down a flight of stairs and kind of rolled down and tumbled down to the bottom of the stairs and just totally tore all of my ligaments in my knee.
Tragically, David would sustain a serious injury that would ruin his career. David would never play another game in the NBA. His NBA career over, estranged from his wife and children, Thompson would file bankruptcy and return to his home of Shelby, North Carolina.
And that was real tough, having to come back home. And, in a small town, people gossip, and, I felt so bad for my parents because at one point they were so proud of me, and then I come back and, everybody was talking bad about me.
If you know the Bible, there's a parable in there about the prodigal son. And I think he went back to Shelby. It's almost like the prodigal son. They're going to take him back with open arms.
David would take a hard look beyond the knee injury at the destructive path his life had taken.
For a long time, basketball had been my life. And without basketball, I didn't really have an identity. I went through some down times, but finally, I made one of the most important decisions anyone could make. And I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior.
Through the church, David would find fulfillment. He reunited with wife Kathy, daughters Erica and Brooke, and reconnected with his beloved alma mater, North Carolina State. Today, Thompson still has the touch, but his days of flying are over. In 1996, Thompson was elected to the Basketball Hall of Fame with longtime friend and opponent George Gervin. Today, David works with kids, teaching them basketball and lessons in life.
Success just doesn't happen. You got to plan it. You got to set goals. You got to set short-term goals and long-term goals. You must believe in yourself, because if you don't believe in yourself, no one else will.
David has recaptured the joy of his childhood by mentoring the youth of today. Although Thompson's career would often be measured by his vertical leap, his accomplishments were far greater. In college, Thompson would conquer the Goliath of UCLA, and Sports Illustrated would select David as one of its top 5 college players of all time. The original high flyer, his 73-point game ranked second only to Wilt Chamberlain.
If David had not had his problems, today we would be talking about him in the same breath that we talk about Michael Jordan and Julius Erving, because believe me, David Thompson was that kind of player.
His style and ABA roots have become a part of pop culture.
Keep that funk alive. Well, it's 1975, and we just be keeping the funk.
Playing above the rim, David Thompson would influence the generations to follow.
I think it elevated through the years. When it got to me, I took it another step, and now you got kids that are taking it even on a higher scale. So it's a little David Thompson in all of us.
Who could imagine a greater player than David Thompson flying through the air? Bam! Throwing them down. When you dream of the perfect basketball player, you visualize David Thompson.